Am I audible? Yeah. Well, I'll just concentrate on the new education policy, the draft new education policy, because this is the draft which perhaps is the most dangerous document which is circulating, which is going to define the future of all of us in this country in a very, very significant way. What my other colleagues have talked about is the fact that, how the new education policy, or maybe the kind of things which are happening, is going to create conditions for much cheap labor with no specialization and so on and so forth, or what people said that you will have employment, the first job and the second job and the third job. That means one is talking about flexible employment scenario, and therefore you need not be trained in any specific job at a given point of time, because you've got to train yourself time and again. But what's really interesting is that all these, that one is really talking about, one is really looking around and experiencing, is there in the document. And one has to really read the document a little more carefully in order to see as to where it's leading us to. Firstly, since I work on school education, I also work on universities and college education, but because the current experiences around is much bigger than what is there in the document. But if you perhaps relate the two, then you will be in a position to make much sense. That means the experiences around us, or with what has really happened within, say, about 4 weeks. 4 weeks in the sense that the week that I'm referring to, when the minister, education minister, Mr. Pokhriyal, he chaired the board of the IITs and IIMs, perhaps on separate meetings or whatever, and the annual, the total course fee in IIT, I think, has been raised from somewhere between 19 lakhs to 23 lakhs for the entire course. That's there on the document. I mean, that's there very much. You can see it. I mean, I am very poor at counting money, so lakhs could be crores. I've never seen so much of money once, at a time. So anyway, so that's the kind of which will give you an idea as to what is really being thought by this government at the level of such apex professional institutions, and so on and so forth. The most important couple of points which I would like to just share with you, that the education right from day one, ever since we adopted a kind of a framework of public education right after the URSS dispatch 1854, in whatever manner that came, and it translated during the colonial period and subsequent periods, we have not been in a position to, in this country, create a true public education system. Why I'm saying this? I'm saying this precisely because if you look into the experiences of the Europe, which was also a class-ridden society, a feudal society, but education played the most important role in terms of, say, what we can call public education and private education, kind of a divide existing there, where public education became far more prominent in perhaps bringing about some kind of an equality, whatever equality or a sense of equality that we see in those societies is largely a consequence of, I would say, it has, because I look at it from the vantage point of what education did in the process of modernization, in the process of enlightenment or science education and all that. I think these institutions played a very, very important role. They don't want me to talk about. Anyway, yeah, not these. Yeah. So, we always had some kind of a system in this country which really created a class of better educated from not so well educated. Say for example, I keep sharing this with most of my students, and I can see quite a few of them sitting in, and they will get bored again. सच्ची सर फिर शुरू हो गए. तो वो मैं कह रहा हूँ कि आप देखिए क्या व्यवस्था है. At the bottom level, you have the panchayat schools, where per capita expenditure comes out to be nearly about 57 to 58 rupees per month, or even less. This is an inflated figure. And at the top of the government profiling, you have the Navodaya Vidyalaya and the Kendriya Vidyalaya, where the per capita expenditure could be close to about 8,000 rupees. So this is the kind of a gap that we have created within the framework of public education. Why this has happened? Can we really say, I'm not sparing this government for having created such a document blatantly trying to create, now accepting that we can't really teach everybody and not everybody is really meant to be taught. And I'll bring examples from the document itself, which says that no, this is not possible. We have failed in the last 70 years despite our all efforts. So let that be. Let the ones who have done well progress, and let the ones who could not really do well be the simple wage workers serving, a servant serving another servant, and that, kind of a hierarchical kind of a thing which we all very well know. So this document is an excellent document of how it creates a kind of a society which I can call, if there is, I will try to define this, but I can call it only Brahmanical capitalism. Why I call it Brahmanical capitalism? Not because I am talking about any Brahmin as a caste. I am talking about the Brahmanical ideology which has really gelled so well in the contemporary phase of capitalism. In fact, those who have been historians of capitalism would say that it was Brahmanism and capitalism was so antithetical initially. Now they have joined hands. It's a very, very dangerous proposition. And how it really happens. Okay. Open the draft. You could have it on you guys are too good at, you can just change over pages and so on and so forth. It says, number one, that we have, the government has made commitment towards greater expenditure in order to bring about equality. And the best that we have been in a position to achieve is about 2.9%. So our commitment to 6% stays. But at the same time it says, we don't promise, so don't demand. Okay? So we can't really bring 6%. Now if you were bent upon, if you are saying that, okay, at some places, because sometimes when you are really telling lies, you don't know where you told what kind of lies. So similarly, in one page you say one thing, in another page you really contradict yourself. So they say, but we have to reach somewhere about 6% of the GDP and so on and so forth, in order that we create much better conditions, equitable conditions, better labs, better things. They say everything. And then they say that, but at the same time, we have to also charge user fee. Now this is a contradiction. Now if you have to charge user fee, I don't know where the matter is going to end, whether you will start charging user fee in terms of the services that we provide, the teachers provide, so someday the teacher's salary will also be recovered from you, the sky is the limit, so it can talk about that. It talks about that. Then it says that since we cannot deliver quality education to all, let me tell you, in the review of the fourth 5-year plan, or third 5-year plan, one of India's known educationists, J.P. Nayak, who was also the first, if I'm not wrong, he was the secretary to the Kothari Commission, J.P. Nayak. And Kothari Commission is the document one should perhaps look at if one is talking about education. And the document was known as Education and National Development. This document nowhere matches the kind of an insight that document brings in. This is not an insightful document. This is only a program and a kind of a programmatic way through which they would like to introduce something which they are very much interested in. So what we really see is that in this document, they talk about three important provisions at the school level itself. So that means, let us try to understand. If we look at the higher education survey data, which is a government document, if we look at the NSS data even of the 2011 and so on and so forth, and if you were to compare with different sources of data, including the including the Census of India, then around the time that the government brought in their 11th plan document, they were still proposing. An 11th plan document was not proposed by the current government, it was proposed by the Manmohan Singh's government. At that time, they were still proposing 8% GER in higher education. That means GER is gross enrollment ratio in higher education, which our country had already achieved around that particular point of time, and the government did not know. The government, naturally, because they don't want to acknowledge. I mean, it's not only the character of this state government, it's also somewhat been the character of the previous governments also, but they never stopped the NSS data from being public. I mean, that's a big difference between the earlier government and this government. I mean, the NSSO had full freedom. I mean, and it's a technical body, so therefore, one can always have questions, and every question and critique is a very, very welcome suggestion. But then it says that in order to achieve 25%, 35%, because we have to match, we have to have the dividend, what we call the demographic dividend. I tell you, at some level, I find, when I look at it very critically, that while we are really trying to, at the global scale, have the advantage of the demographic dividend, we, through this document, is just working against the very objective of demographic dividend. Why? Because it says that while it talks about education for all, and the big leap that it makes, there are two ways that makes a leap from the earlier document. One is that it makes early education, early childhood education, that is Anganwadi and whatever you may call it, the nursery classes and all that, compulsory. That's one positive that I can see in this document, because then it will become part and parcel of the public education system. The catch is, the footnote is, only if it stays. Otherwise it will all be part and parcel of the private education system, which is already using that. So provided that we retain public education, yeah, this will be a good addition. The other thing that it says is that we'll extend the provisions of the Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan to the Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan, which is valid only up to class 8th. Now the provisions will take into consideration class 10th and class 12th and so on and so forth. So it will be covered, and therefore, we'll ensure that there is a proper progression. And then at the next paragraph it says, we will, in order to enhance what we call quality of education, we will, because the earlier governments were only bothered about quantity, so they opened so many schools. We are not going to open so many schools. They don't say that, but that's what it means. But we are going to ensure quality education. So in order to ensure quality education, there will be a census examination. Now what is this census examination? ये मुझे अभी तक समझ में नहीं आया, लेकिन मुझे बात जो समझ में आ रही है वो ये है कि सभी को एग्जाम देना पड़ेगा. सेंसस सबका होता है. उसी तरह से मुझे लग रहा है कि सेंसस एग्जामिनेशन मींस no child can escape this. Why I am saying this? Precisely because class 10th board examination is an optional examination in the current scheme of things. You can't escape class 12th, but you can choose not to appear for you can take the school examination and still move ahead. That means you have an option. And on the top of that, you also have the provision under the RTE, that is Right to Education Act, that you cannot stop a child in the early years of education. That means the child cannot be stopped, cannot be detained. The child will move on, progress as per his or her age. Now once you bring in census examination, and at what level? Class 3, class 5, class 7, class 10th again, the child would appear. class 12 the child has to appear in any case. So you have 5 hurdles to cross. And at such an early stage, when class 3, what examination do you think a child of that age is really going to understand? So the idea is that you may not have a fully no detention policy, or you may implement a partial no detention policy, or you do away with the no detention policy in the name of one thing or the other. But what is very clear, that the child would be discouraged to move ahead. Who are these children who cannot make the mark of this what we call is the census examination? So this is a process to keep certain segments of the population entering the higher level of school education, because once you are in a position to complete primary education, you are there in the middle segments, because elementary segments have been taken together. So you can move into elementary education, the higher levels of elementary education. From higher levels of elementary education, you move into secondary education. Once you cross higher secondary, you have a greater chance, because if you look into the what we call is an eligible enrollment ratios, that means all those who are eligible to get enrolled in colleges, you find that very few drop out. Interestingly, the number of those who drop out at the primary level is bigger than those who drop out at the +2 level, right? But +2 level, again, the boy or the girl is in a position to perhaps, participate also in the labor market. There are other kinds of compulsions, but even among the most weaker sections, there is a possibility that the person will enter higher education. Now, this process of entering higher education has been created by public education systems. The possibility, the dream that, we were really talking about, that, okay, the state would make the endeavor to create opportunities, equitable opportunities. I really do not know. We all know that the opportunities are not equitable all over. You can't really compare the schools and colleges in the rural areas with urban areas. So there are vast differences in terms of the quality and the provisions. I'm not so much bothered about quality. I'm bothered about provisions, Now, let me share some statistics, because we come from the center of where we only deal with the statistics, and Nivedita will kill me if I don't talk about statistics, because then what did you do from CSR? So, let me tell you, the situation is like this, that nearly 2/3 of elementary schools in our country, they do not have 2/3, in spite of Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, which has been functioning from 2002, and this is almost about 17 years of unabated, uninterrupted, provisioning of school education. There are only 3 things that has happened. The school buildings have been constructed because the local panchayat members, they became school contractors. Let me tell you, you can go and find. कहीं पे भी स्कूलों में क्या हो रहा है? मास्टर है? नहीं है जी. बिल्डिंग बन रही? हाँ बन रही. मास्टरों का ये हाल है. मास्टर जो भी है गांव में पढ़ाने के लिए बहुत जीवट चाहिए भाई. कितने दूर जाके आपको पढ़ाना पड़ता है. कभी कभी तो पैदल भी चलना पड़ता है. तो 8वीं दर्जे तक के स्कूल में 3 टीचर है ना. यानी कि एलिमेंट्री classes are up to class 8. And the average number of school teachers provided in the government schools in different parts of the country is between 3.5 to 3.8. That means, there could be some schools where you have adequate supply of teachers. The urban areas are pretty better. But if you have fewer teachers, then you can just imagine what we are really doing. We are playing with the future of our students. Young, children in a very, very formative stages of their education. And that becomes, these are just some of the statistics. I can just go on and telling you as to how this inequitable, these statistics could be on social and economic lines all over the country, not only made by this government, even by the previous government, and so on and so forth. The story is much bigger. I just gave you a profile of what Indian education system has been. So if you have this kind of a differential provisioning of school education, as it is, in spite of these limitations. I think children in rural and urban areas, parents, through their own labor, whatever, whether they earn enough or they don't earn enough, it has certainly been the role of the public institutions, public funded institutions. And let me tell you, it may sound a little rhetoric, but public funded institutions have been the only, performing assets in this country. All other assets have been non-performing assets. Because, look at, as to most of us sitting here, I can tell you, the majority of people sitting here, including me, we have come from public funded institutions, government school funded institutions, right up to JNU. So, and those who really say, why can't you guys take a loan? Sitting in New York, I don't know, Timbuktu, having done wherever they have done their graduation from. Yeah, we borrowed money. In America, they give you loan, Can you just imagine what is the non-performing assets on a student's loan? Tell me that. And where is the job? And who is going to give you loan for the kind of education? So, they can talk about all kinds of nonsense in the present day situation. But what is the most sensible thing that this government is doing? It's doing something which I call it sensible, because it is really creating a hierarchical restructuring of the Indian society. And they are extremely afraid of the fact that if you look into the current survey, the educational enrollment ratios, which were at a tremendous gap between the high caste and the SC, SCs, STs. We do a lot of such kind of poor, non-poor kind of an analysis. Amresh Dubey has done a similar analysis. It's a published work. We did for the UGC some kind of an exercise of this kind on equity in education. And we found that the gap in enrollment ratios across these four categories, that means the others, non-scheduled, the OBCs and the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribe, barring the scheduled tribes and the Muslims, elsewhere it is catching up. And elsewhere catching up means what? This is a frightening scenario for the traditional dominant castes. They are the ones who cannot just imagine a situation whereby their local dominance could be done away with. And therefore, you can see this kind of a grand alliance across the traditional dominant propertied classes and the classes which benefited the most as a consequence of whatever that happened in the name of land reforms. That I'm really talking about. Those people who in fact used to work as tenant cultivators, part of them have become owner cultivators, and they come largely from not so deprived communities, but who are traditionally known as the educationally and economically backward classes, right? Now, there is an alliance there also. I'm not shy about admitting the fact that, at different levels, because of a certain kind of a political goal, there is a class alliance and a caste alliance, and that is getting reflected in this kind of a document. The document which tells you that we are not going to not only have, and it says very clearly, that the provisions of the, RTE and no detention policy will be re-examined. Right? So that means those commitments which the state made under RTE can be re-examined. That means, what will you re-examine? Let me tell you what is to be re-examined. There are certain conditions if you have to set up a school by a private sector. Then there is a certain amount of area, certain kind of a building, some kind of a, all those structures, so many teachers, open spaces and all that. Now we can see schools flourishing in multi-storied buildings with no playground. Now that is what they would like to tweak. Because the private investment should take place. Private investment, in spite of the fact that it has been there for quite 15 years, 20 years now in higher education, they have not yet earned enough returns from there. In in school education, that's a huge business which is now happening everywhere in the country, barring a few states. So therefore, the whole idea basically is to in fact create yet another conditions so that, the vertical mobility, or what we can call it socio-economic mobility, which perhaps is the only strength for anybody who is deprived, from different parts of the country to in fact compete with the rest, who could not only compete but do better in their lives. This opportunity is totally being denied. So NEP is basically a document which in fact is not only through the structural reform that they are going to, one structural reform that Moshe talked about was the structural adjustment policy of 1991, and you know that what really happened in 1991, one of the sectors which really suffered the worst in terms of the provisioning of public education fund was education, and education is like medicine, like a person who is who is ailing. If you miss one of the doses, then there is no point giving a double dose in the evening. So if you miss the opportunity there, children who have dropped out, it's very difficult to bring them back. So the harm has already been done, right? So therefore, education, and it happened in the initial years between 2001 and 91 to 2090. So not 2019. 91. Yeah, 91 to 19. Yeah, I'm very poor at remembering dates. Anyway, 97. So there has been this, but later on, there has been this upward movement in expenditure. Now this government, again, wants to in fact undo and provide a kind of a model which in fact has taken place quietly in most of the government education institutions, which is called the self-financing system. It had so far been restricted to a few hostels here and there. The hostels mostly in the public sector institutions are being already run by contract. It's in a university like us where we are the ones who are running in a democratic manner. Now this is something which is really creating a kind of a situation for the present government and the present policy makers. Why is creating a problem? Precisely because in spite of having no subsidy, you are still in a position to eat your food with whatever pilferage that may be happening in an amount which is close to about 2,300 to 2,700, isn't it? At best 3,000, which is one of the lowest in the country. Elsewhere, you could be paying much more, and this is without subsidy. So therefore, this tweaking the entire process of your mess bills, your user fee is, I think Sucharita has explained enough, so I would not like to take your time on that. Two more points, very brief points, which is part and parcel of this of the NEP. One, it makes a very, very important commitment that they are going to close down the schools. It's very clear. And they have already started closing down the schools. In the previous government, Rajasthan, I think more than 2,000 plus schools have been closed down. In Telangana, 8,000 schools are proposed to be closed down, or they have already been closed down. Closing down of the schools when it matches, as John Laska says, with the demographic transition is something which is natural. That means, if you have fewer children, or no children, because of the changing fertility behavior of the population, this may happen. The kind of changes which took place primarily in some parts of Kerala, where primary schools had to be closed down. And let me tell you that most of the primary schools in Kerala, they were also upgraded into elementary schools as and when the situation arose. But it didn't happen in this country in spite of the rest of the country, in spite of the provisions of the state. The local administration did not agree with this. So the attempts to close down the schools is already on. And this is one of the most dangerous propositions that we are coming. It may sound very, very logical. What is that? That they will, instead of what they call it school clusters. They don't call it closing down schools, they call it school clusters. That the structure is already restricted. On top of that, if you want to really close down schools, saying that clusters will work more efficiently in the name of efficiency, in the name of monitoring, in name of one thing or the other, they are really trying to close down the schools. Now, what is going to be the implication? The implications are going to be that 43% of our rural villages are always rural anyway, so that's an extra statement that I made, word that I used. 43% of our villages have less than 1,000 population. Right? What would be the demographic structure of these villages? The demographic structure, going by the best that is available, is that there would be about 150 to about 160 children in the age group which is less than 14. Right? That is the best that one can perhaps achieve in 1,000. I mean, that's only those who are below 14 years of age. Now, if most of